Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Missouri State Guard, which is one of the most unique, and well, it is unique, and one of the most interesting organizations of any union or Confederate or state organization that fought in the Civil War. There were a bunch of states that had state troops that fought in the war. Georgia, probably the most famous, Governor Brown there kept a large contingent of state troops in Georgia and did not allow them to fight outside the state. Kentucky had state troops that fought. We'll be going down to Wilson's Creek. Arkansas had state troops that fought. But probably no state had troops that fought as a state force as much as the Missouri State Guard did. So here's the agenda for today. Governor Claiborne Jackson is sworn in January 3rd, 1861, as the new governor of the state. And he gives in Jeff City a fiery speech, basically promoting secession. There's a couple things he wants to do to bring secession about. One of them is he asks the legislature to convene a state convention to determine Missouri's relationship to the federal government. Essentially, he wants a secession convention. The second thing he does is he asks the legislature to create a military bill. Now we've got a Missouri Volunteer Militia, but he wants a beefed up state militia. So he's trying to get a new organization and much more financing to create a new militia in the state that, of course, he hopes will take the state out of the Union. So the state convention, the legislature passes a law saying that there will be a state convention in January. In February is the election, and the election stuns the state legislature. The state legislature is dominated by the Southern elite, and they believe that everybody thinks the same way they do, and they are shocked when the election takes place and there are no avowed secessionists elected, and a vast majority of the people are constitutional or provisional unionists. They want Missouri to stay in the Union as long as the federal government doesn't do a lot of bad things. So at that point, the legislature drops the idea of a military bill. And then the next month, after the convention convenes, they vote not to secede. And so the military bill is technically, some people are working on it, but it's not a priority, and nothing is really getting done. And Governor Jackson is all bummed out about the fact that now there's not going to be a secession, and immediate secession, and there's not going to be a military bill for him. That all changes on May 10th, 1861, when the Camp Jackson affair happens and civilians are killed in St. Louis. The very next day, May 11th, all of a sudden the legislature is shocked into passing a military bill. It's a series of bills that pass between May 11th and May 15th. And it gives the governor certain things. Well, let me read the authorization first. The governor of the state of Missouri is hereby authorized to take such measures as, in his judgment, he may deem necessary or proper to repel such invasion or put down such rebellion. This act shall take effect from its passage. So the legislature is essentially all of a sudden giving Governor Jackson almost unlimited power to deal with any military situation in the state and to lead the state guard in any way he wishes. So the old Missouri Volunteer Militia is wiped out. That organization, all the leaders and everything is wiped out. And there are a lot of pro-union people in the Missouri Volunteer Militia, and all those commissions are now wiped out, which is kind of the intent. The bill created 9 military districts, and they were called divisions. They're not divisions like you would think of in the Army. The Army has divisions that are made of brigades, that are made up of regiments. This is strictly a political thing. It's just all of the people, all of the volunteers in that district in the state, but they're called divisions. Each division is commanded by a brigadier general, and although Governor Jackson is the commander of the Missouri State Guard, in the field, a major general position is created on May 15th to be the actual field commander. In order to raise money for this organization, the State Guard is authorized to borrow $30,000 from state banks. There are 9 state banks at this time and 13 branch banks throughout the state. They're concentrated in St. Louis and in the Little Dixie area along the Missouri River Valley, which are the most economically vibrant areas of the state at that time. So they're allowed to, and this will come in a little bit later, they're allowed to borrow money from any of those banks.
Doug?
Yes.
In light of the dissolution of the militia, who appointed the...
Good question. So once this bill is passed and all the details come out, this picture is of William Harney, who was commander of the Department of the West. If you remember some of our earlier talks, he leaves. He's recalled to Washington because Nathaniel Lyon and Frank Blair, the 2 leading unionists in the state, talk bad about him, and so he has to go explain to General Scott in Washington what's going on. While he's gone, the Cap Jackson affair happens. Cap Jackson happens. Lyon recruits 10 regiments into the Union Army, and he ships 30,000 weapons away from the arsenal to Illinois. So a lot of stuff happens while he's gone. But he comes back the day after Camp Jackson affair, and he's got to be shaking his head going, what in the world is going on? But he kind of settles things down. He has not prosecuted resistance to what's going on in the state very much, but he's not a secessionist. So when he hears what's going on, what the legislature has passed, he says that the military bill is unconstitutional and an indirect ordinance of secession, which it was. So here's what the state looks like. Here's what the districts look like. See, we're in the 2nd military district here. So the commanders, well, let me move on a little bit. We'll do that then. Okay. So those are the 9 military districts based on congressional districts. Any guys have questions about that? So who's in charge of the State Guard? Sterling Price. We know a lot about Sterling Price. Born in Virginia, went to college for a year, then basically flunked out and couldn't afford it. Trained for the law. He migrated here as a young man, became a gentleman planter, but of course politics was always Price's first love. Brigadier General in the Mexican War, governor of the state, chairman of the state convention in 1861, which because the state convention did not vote to secede, that really gave Price a black eye in the minds of Confederate leadership. Jefferson Davis felt like he never could trust Price beyond that point. And also Governor Jackson to some extent too. But Price and Davis hated each other. Price went to, when the State Guard was transferred to Mississippi, which we'll talk about in a little while, Price eventually went to Richmond to have the state troops, Missouri troops, move back across the river, and they really, really hated each other. Davis said Price was the most vain man he had ever met. So Price was not going to get any favors from Davis. Yes, ma'am.
He never met George McClellan, did he?
Price was probably more vain than McClellan. Wow. I think McClellan was probably more arrogant, where Price was just kind of, aloof.
Do you know what year the family, or what year he came to Missouri?
It was in the 1830s, I believe. He had been here a long time. He was a very young man when he came.
Oh, well, okay. Well, 1830s, he would have been in his 30s.
maybe even sooner than that. Because he was still young, he was still in his 20s when he came.
It was what?
In his 20s.
His 20s.
Yeah. Okay, so there are 9 districts. How were they chosen? The military bill said that the soldiers in each district, when they got together, that they would vote on their commander. Yeah, Kent's laughing. But of course, that didn't happen. Almost all of them are appointed by Governor Jackson. Now, talking about Price, the interesting thing, just to backtrack about Price a minute. He happens to be in Jeff City at the time. Before his election, Governor Jackson is the banking commissioner of the state. He resigns so he can run for governor. When he gets elected governor, he appoints Sterling Price as the banking commissioner. You know, the incestuous relationship of these powerful people it's no different then than it is now. So Price is in Jeff City, doing his job, and offers his service to Jackson, who appoints him. Jackson personally appoints him as the commander of the State Guard. What I found interesting was there was another guy in the state at that time that was a better soldier and far more known for military prowess than Sterling Price. Anybody remember who that is? From the Mexican War? Alexander Donovan was commander of the 1st Missouri Mounted Cavalry during the Mexican War, general, winner of the Battle of Sacramento. Wrote a book, very famous person. Much better military reputation than Price. And he was a better soldier. But Donovan, that's the town of Donovan is named after, by the way. But Donovan is he's a slave owner, but he's kind of a loose cannon. He ran with the Constitutional Union Party during the election of 1860. He defended the Mormons during the Mormon troubles. He's not really a guy that you're going to intimidate. Supposedly he's a big guy. In fact, I think he met Abraham Lincoln, and Abraham Lincoln said he was the only guy he ever talked to that was as big in stature as his reputation. But anyway, Donovan is passed over for commander of the State Guard, probably because he's not one of that what they call the central clique of the Democratic Party, like Boone and Howard, Randolph counties in the central part of the state that really ran the state, like the Democratic machine for a lot of years. He's not part of that clique. So he's passed over. He's offered initially command of one of the divisions, and Donovan tells him to go pound sand. And he does not participate in the war really in any way militarily, although he does politically. He's part of the committees and things that go on after that, but he doesn't take part in any part of the war. And I've always wondered what would happen to the State Guard in this state if Donovan, somebody who was a really good soldier, had taken over the State Guard instead of Sterling Price. Anyway, it's kind of a what-if question. So, So yes, these guys, almost all of them were appointed by Governor Jackson. Except for this guy here, Meriwether Jeff Thompson. He was disappointed that the state had not seceded early, so he went to Memphis and was going to go to Richmond to see if he could get a commission. Now, he had been in the militia, and he had gone to military school, but he wasn't able to get into West Point or the Virginia Military Academy, so he had a very small military background, but not much. So he gets to Memphis, he sees a whole bunch of people going to Richmond to get commissions who have much better qualifications than he does, so he says, man, this is hopeless. So he turns around, he crosses the state into the southeast part of the state, into the 1st military district in the southeast part of the state, and he begins mobilizing troops. And they actually elect him. He is actually elected, even though he is from St. Joseph. He has never been in the southeast part of the state. He's lived in St. Joseph for about 15 years. But he is elected to command that 1st military district. And those guys, as we'll see here, they do not serve with the rest of the State Guard because they are geographically isolated. See, they're way down here, and most of the activity of the State Guard takes place in this area here, and they never make it over there. So they're going to spend the whole war, as long as they're an organization, they're going to spend it here and down here, and never hook up. Second Division, that's where we are. Thomas Harris was an attorney. He attended the United States Military Academy but never graduated. He joined the Army in the Mexican War, but he was commissioned as a lieutenant, but the war ended before he could actually even leave the States, so he didn't get to take part in that. He did take part in a couple of filibustering operations in Central America in the 1850s, but those really didn't amount to anything, just getting a bunch of people killed. He lived in Hannibal at the time that the war started. He was appointed by Governor Jackson, and he was there at Lexington, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. After Lexington, he resigned his commission, and he served in the Confederate Congress.
Wait, so Doug, you're saying America was messing around in Latin America
Yes.
before 2020?
Yes, well, actually, this wasn't America. These were Southerners that got these organizations together, went down to Central America, tried to overthrow these governments, and not to take over for the United States, but take over for themselves. And to start a whole new country with pro-slavery. And, yeah.
This is rhymes with
But, I mean, there's all kinds of other Marines in Central America stories, too, to talk about. Yeah.
I think we learned.
Doug,
Yes.
Jeff Thompson, was he
Further we
the
look back, the further we can see.
gorilla? Jeff
Yes.
Thompson?
He got the nickname of the Swamp Fox.
Some people-
And were the soldiers that he organized in the first division, were they his band, his guerrilla band?
Yes.
So,
I mean, they weren't really guerrillas per se. I mean, they used hit and run tactics, hid in the swamps, but they were an actually organized force. But yes, that's who you're thinking of. Third Division, John D. Clark Sr. He was a politician from Fayette. He was part of the Central Clique of the Democrat Party. He fought as an officer in the Mexican War, served in Congress. He played a big role in the Democratic National Conventions in 1860. They met in Charleston and later in Baltimore. He resigned after Wilson's Creek and served in the Confederate Congress. His son, John D. Clark Jr., became a Confederate officer and was a brigade commander at Pilot Knob. 4th Division was commanded by William Slack, who was a lawyer and politician from Chillicothe. He had also served in the Mexican War. He was seriously wounded at Wilson's Creek. He had just come back and joined the Army, was given command of one of the 2 brigades that were formed from the State Guard that went to the Confederate Army, and then was mortally wounded again at Pea Ridge. He didn't have a very good time in the war. Alexander Early was from a prominent family in St. Louis. He was a regular Army officer before the war, and he ended up getting killed in Prairie Grove. Mosby Monroe Parsons was a lawyer. He was, once again, he's one of these guys in the Central Clique. He's from Jeff City. He ran as lieutenant governor on the Breckinridge ticket. Candidate for lieutenant governor, Breckinridge ticket in the 1860 election with Hancock Jackson. It went nowhere. He had experience. He was a captain in the Mexican War, and he fled to Mexico after the war, like many Missourians, and he and some other folks were murdered down there. His family eventually got $50,000 from the Mexican, when the U.S. sued the Mexican government. He was murdered by Mexican soldiers. James McBride was a lawyer from Houston, Missouri, that is. He had no military experience other than he was a judge at the time the war started. He had really no military experience, and he never received a commission. Most of these other guys that survived either went into Congress or got commissions in the Confederate Army. McBride never got a commission. He was not high on Sterling Price's list. Price didn't think he was a good organizer and disciplinarian, which if Sterling Price doesn't think you're a good disciplinarian, then that doesn't say a whole lot for you. Because Price was not a good disciplinarian. So he actually served throughout most of the war, but in a state capacity. He didn't cross the river with the rest of the state guard. He stayed in Arkansas most of the war.
Of all of them you've described so far, would you agree he seems like the most political of political generals in this command structure?
Well, the next guy coming up was too.
Well, just with the no military experience,
Yeah.
I mean, he
He
had
had
the appointment through connections.
Yeah, he didn't have any military experience at all. Why he selected? I mean, he's not part of the central clique. He has no military experience. He was a prominent lawyer in Springfield, and then in Houston or Texas County, Houston. Why he was selected, I have no idea. His troops fought well at every battle they were in, but he was not personally held in very high esteem. I don't know if that part of the state, that south central part of the state, was Breckinridge country during the election of 1860, but it's very sparsely populated. And I don't know if there were just no other. I mean, there was Springfield, so but Springfield was Springfield was more of a unionist town, kind of constitutional union, Republican and constitutional union town, than most of the southern part of the state. So maybe there just wasn't anybody that they felt like could do it, or they liked, because a lot of it is popularity. But yeah, he was the weakest.
I think the other part of it too, you're the division commander, now go recruit your division,
True.
right? So if you got a little money, if you're an attorney and you've got connections, maybe this guy can raise a few companies for us.
Being a judge in the largest geographic or size-wise county in the state, that's definitely a factor.
You
Being
can
a
empty
prominent
the jails
citizen.
out too.
What's that?
You can empty out the jails too.
Yeah. Next guy is James Raines. He is a lawyer, politician from Sarcoxy. He also ran unsuccessfully on the Constitutional Union ticket for lieutenant governor of the state, and ran for Congress on the Constitutional Union ticket, but was not elected. He did have pre-war military experience in the militia. In fact, he was a militia colonel. He and McBride are the weakest of the division commanders by far. Raines performed very poorly in his combat situations, and he never receives a Confederate commission. He does stay with the state guard throughout the war in Arkansas, even though at one time he did actually, even though he had a state commission, he actually, as a brigadier general, he actually commanded troops, Confederate troops for a while, which was kind of weird. But then he was once again found to be lacking and was relieved, and basically spent most of the war kind of cooling his heels. The 9th Division was St. Louis, and there were two guys that served as commander of the 9th Division. The bottom guy is Meriwether Clark Sr., Meriwether Lewis Clark, I should say, Sr., the son of explorer William Clark. He went to the military academy, fought in the Black Hawk War, and in Mexico. He was an engineer. Some of his buildings are still around in St. Louis. He never really did much. He never really organized troops in St. Louis. And organizing troops in St. Louis was a problem because St. Louis was a heavy Republican area, was a Unionist area, and the Army was in St. Louis. So there was really no recruiting done in St. Louis and in that area, and that division never got off the ground. Clark went east. He got a commission from the Confederate government, and he fought throughout the war and was captured at the end of the war. Daniel Frost, of course, we know pretty well. St. Louisan. Went to the military academy, fought in Mexico. He married a local gal in St. Louis and had lived in St. Louis for probably about 10 or 12 years before the war started. He was a political animal. He was probably the most important officer in the Missouri Volunteer Militia before the war started. He had taken state troops to the Missouri-Kansas border because in 1860, Kansas had been coming across the border, raiding into the western southwest counties. And so the state sent a detachment of troops down there. John Bowen, who we'll talk about later, also was part of that contingent. But those troops, the St. Louis Missouri Volunteer Militia were really the shock troops of the state. And when it came time to conspire, when Governor Jackson began to conspire with to take the state out of the Union, Frost was really his military advisor. So he's probably one of the most important state guards, even though he also never organized troops. And he did fight at the Battle of Pea Ridge, and afterwards he went into the Confederate Army. Once his family was kicked out of St. Louis, was exiled to Canada, Frost deserted the Confederate Army in Arkansas and went to be with his family, and was later charged as a deserter and dropped from the Confederate rolls. So, I read something, let's see, Frost, after the war, he had to explain to Unionists why he went over to the Confederate side. He had to explain to his Confederate friends why he's a deserter.
And he was in command at Camp Jackson.
He was in command at Camp Jackson. He was captured by Nathaniel Lyon.
Lucy, you got some explaining to do.
And the site of Camp Jackson was later owned by the Frost family. And the Frost campus of St. Louis University occupies that land now and is named for Daniel Frost. Supposedly, I think this is true, there was a statue of Nathaniel Lyon in that area. And his daughter, Frost's daughter, was going to donate the land and $1 million to St. Louis University. But she said, this is what you have to do. You have to get rid of that statue. So the story is, now this part I don't know if it's true, that all the priests in the area and instructors went around to all the taverns and whatever and got all the rowdies worked up, and miraculously the statue got moved to Lyon Park down by the arsenal now, which is where it is today. Yes?
There was also an informational plaque at St. Louis University that has since been removed.
Oh, yeah? How long ago did that happen?
It had been there for many years. Back in 2014, I was doing a project with Missouri Humanities, and I sent an intern there, and it was still standing there then, but it's gone now.
Oh, that's interesting. So General Harney returns from Washington, D.C., and he finds there's chaos in the state. So he meets with General Price, who's since become commander of the State Guard, and they come up with what's called the Price-Harney Agreement, where the state forces will maintain order in outstate Missouri, and the federal troops will stay in St. Louis, maintain order in St. Louis, but they will not leave St. Louis. And the State Guard will not mobilize and get ready for war. Well, this is obviously if you're a unionist, it's a terrible deal, because you know they're not going to abide by that. Unionists outstate parts of Missouri are still being harassed. The State Guard is still mobilizing. So Nathaniel Lyon and Frank Blair once again start screaming to Washington that this is not acceptable. And eventually, because of this agreement, General Harney is relieved, and Nathaniel Lyon becomes acting commander of the Department of the West. He and Frank Blair get with the main people, and General Price and Governor Jackson meet at the Planter's House, which is, if you know where the old courthouse is in St. Louis, it's about a block north of the courthouse in St. Louis. They get together, they're going to have a conference to try and work things out. Well, that doesn't go too well, because Jackson and Lyon do most of the talking, and they cannot agree on anything. This is where Lyon makes that famous statement that before I would see you dictate to my government in any matter, no matter how small, I would see you, and you dead and buried. This means war. So Jackson and Price flee back to Jefferson City. Basically, Lyon declares war on the state. Jackson orders all Missouri State Guard to rendezvous in Jefferson City. Lyon pursues. Jackson knows that his position in Jeff City is not tenable. So he retreats up the river to Boonville, and they're going to make a stand at Boonville. And troops in the western part of the state are to rally in Lexington, which is a little farther west on the river. General Price is sick at this point. He goes to Lexington and waits there while troops kind of congregate at both places. So Jackson and Price retreat to Jeff City. A couple days later, they go to Boonville. 2 or 3 days later, Lyon takes steamboats up. He arrives and captures the capital. But that's not good enough. He wants to pursue and destroy that state force. So the State Guard is here, and once again, Lyon and his boys hop on steamboats, and they head up to Boonville. Governor Jackson decides he's going to make a stand at Boonville. They make these fortifications along the Roachport to Boonville Road. The Federals land. They had steamboats. They land a couple miles away. They march inland. They meet Confederate pickets. They fire on them, and then the pickets retreat. Lyon moves up and takes up a position in front of the State Guard. The State Guard has better terrain. They're kind of on a hill up here. Lyon's down below. He's been coming through the bottoms. Lyon's troops begin to fire on the State Guard, and then they bring up the artillery. And once they bring up the artillery, the State Guard flees. They flee back to their camp. The steamboat, one of the steamboats that brought the Union troops upriver, has cannons on it. They begin firing on the Confederates in their camp, and they flee back to the fairgrounds, the armory in Boonville. That steamship follows and fires on them again, and they flee, and that is basically the Battle of Boonville, the first Union victory in the Civil War. Yes?
Did you make that map, or did you
No.
pull it from somewhere?
No, I plagiarized it.
I'm looking for somebody who can make maps like
Oh.
that. And if you made it, I'd
No.
love to know that.
No. So, Boonville is a public relations disaster for the State Guard. They do not perform well. Governor Jackson's military advisor, since Price isn't there, is a guy named John Sappington Marmaduke, who was recently...
Where do they get these names? Jesus Christ.
Sappington is
Sappington, Marmaduke?
Sappington is a prominent St. Louis family.
Yeah, I know that.
So,
Marmaduke?
That's the
That's a southern name.
It was Point graduate too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he was a West Point graduate. Regular Army officer, lieutenant, resigned his commission to serve the State Guard. And Claiborne Jackson happens to be his uncle. Jackson marries into the Sappington family. Like I said, they're just unbelievably how these Southern elites and
Everybody.
in the central clique are all related. Marmaduke advises his uncle not to fight. He says, we can't do this. He doesn't even get close to the battle, which is not, wasn't very courageous on his part. So this is a public relations disaster. These are a couple of northern cartoons. The Great Missouri Lion Hunt. It's got Jackson wearing a dress.
Oh.
And then you can see the other one here. Lion attacking. This is Jackson, Jack. And this is Price here. Not a very flattering, not flattering pictures. 19th century newspapers could be brutal. So after Boonville, Jackson orders Price and all his troops to retreat to Cowskin Prairie in the western, very southwest corner of the state. There's a stockyard down there was a big open area that they could use to train and mobilize. And the folks from Boonville, they retreat and they hook up, and they're all going to head south together. At the town of Coal Camp, which was a stop on the Butterfield Overland Stage route, there are pro-Union home guards organizing there. They're Germans. And they were in a position right across Jackson's line of retreat to stop him. However, there were also Missouri State Guard organizing there. They had not hooked up with any of the main body yet. They're still in this area waiting to hook up. They attack the Union home guards at Coal Camp. They surprise them in the morning in a barn. Big fight breaks out, and they defeat this Union home guard unit. So clearing the route for Jackson to retreat to Cowskin Prairie. Marmaduke, by the way, is not there then. Marmaduke is so mad at his uncle that he quits and goes to Richmond and gets a commission of his own.
Joe Shelby would go back to Coal Camp and give him a little bit more vengeance later on and execute some of the residents there.
Yeah, bad deal.
By Richmond, I presume you mean Virginia.
Yes.
Was Marmaduke's uncle?
Lions or?
So Lyon had previously dispatched Franz Siegel from St. Louis. Siegel is not with Lyon at Boonville. Otherwise, who knows? He might have even screwed up Boonville. But Lyon has been sent to Springfield. I'm sorry. Siegel's been sent to Springfield, and he is supposed to block the southern retreat south to keep them from joining Confederate forces in the south. He blocks the path of the State Guard as they retreat just north of Carthage, about 8 miles north of Carthage, and a running battle takes place for several hours, over several miles. But the State Guard force is much larger than Siegel's, and they eventually push Siegel out of the way. Siegel retreats back to Springfield, and the route to Cowskin Prairie and possible support from other southern forces is wide open. Has anyone ever been to Carthage battlefield? I have not.
I've been in the museum there. It's very small. They got like some Missouri State Guard uniforms, and they got a little diorama.
How far into the state of Missouri is Cowskin Prairie?
It's right on the very edge. It's literally on the edge of the state.
It's as far as you can go.
It is as far as you can go, yes. And that was the objective. So Lyons guys, they hang out in Boonville for a while. They get regular Army troops and 2 Kansas units from Fort Leavenworth join them. The 1st Iowa Infantry joins them, and then eventually they march down to Springfield. So you've got the State Guard here, Union consolidated in Springfield.
What was the date on Carthage? Do you remember that?
I believe it was July 5th.
So these are happening before Bull Run.
What's that?
These are all happening before Bull Run.
Yes, Bull Run is what, July 21st or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was the news. What was happening in Missouri was the news.
Yeah. And the first year of the war, we get a lot of publicity. What's going on? This Battle of Boonville, it's in all the papers. I mean, there's only a few thousand soldiers involved on each side, but the papers on the east, from here to the East Coast, are really playing it up. And the entire Lyon campaign, there are reporters there, and the news is going back, and it's a big deal the first year of the war because there's nothing else going on.
Yeah.
You've got a little bit going on in the east, but really this is it. This is the big show, or one of the big shows. So we've already talked about the Battle of Wilson's Creek. We'll go over a little bit, just a little bit. The State Guard is in the very southwest corner. They hook up with regular Confederate troops under this guy here, Ben McCullough from Texas. He's got a brigade of troops from Texas and Louisiana. There's also a brigade of Arkansas troops that are hanging out with them. McCullough's job is to guard the Indian Territory, but he wants to help out this other pro-Southern organization. So between McCullough's troops and the Arkansas troops, Price is given some weapons and ammunition and food, and he's given some support, and the State Guard steals whatever they can get their hands on and to stay in the field, and they're able to survive. So eventually, Price talks McCullough into attacking the federal force in Springfield. One thing McCullough does not like, though, is that there are a lot of camp followers with Price. Camp followers and unarmed soldiers. He tells, they're in Cassville at this time, they moved up to Cassville in Berry County, or just a little northeast of where they were in Charleston Prairie. But Price says he's going to do it, and then they follow along. And then they get to a place called, the advance gets to a place called Doug Spring, where the Union Army comes out of Springfield and routes the Confederate Army under James Raines, or routes the State Guard cavalry under James Raines. And then so McCullough now has less reason to trust Price. And then about this time he discovers that even though Price has agreed again to leave the camp followers and unarmed soldiers behind, they're once again following. So Price and McCullough have a rocky relationship. They arrive on the banks of Wilson's Creek to discover the Union Army's not there. The Union Army comes out of Springfield and attacks the Confederate Army that is not prepared for it to be attacked. Sigel, this is a two-phase battle. Siegel's down here. The State Guard is up here, though. Lyon surprises them on what is now Bloody Hill, now called Bloody Hill, and the State Guard races up that hill to oppose them. The State Guard does most of the dirty fighting at Wilson's Creek. Even though McCullough still does not trust them, they're the ones that bore most of the brunt in that battle. And they perform, all things considered, most of the troops, especially the infantry, perform very well, and the artillery for that matter too. Cavalry, not so much. But this is the first real big battle most of these guys have ever been in, and they perform pretty well. Yes.
How many of these men wore actual uniforms at this time? It was so early in the war.
There were no official uniforms. Some of the companies had organized uniforms when they left. A lot of the women folk in the communities would sew uniforms and send them. Some of them had militia uniforms before the war, but there was no standard uniform at this time.
In the Union or the Confederate?
The Union had uniforms.
They had gotten uniforms by that time.
Yes.
All of them.
Now some of them were, any troops coming out of St. Louis, the regular Army units and the Missouri volunteer units had uniforms. Regular Army U.S. uniforms. Some of the troops, like the 1st Iowa that fought there, they, each company had its own uniform made by the locals. Some were gray, some were black. They were all different, but they had uniforms. I don't know what the Kansans had. I suspect the Kansans had uniforms because they came from Fort Leavenworth. Which,
You were basically blue.
Yes.
Uniform.
yeah, they were. Most of the Union people would have been in blue.
Other than the one cavalry unit had red stripes. They were called the Red.
The reason I ask is I remember years ago, it was a long time ago, so it was a book on Battle of Wilson's Creek that I had read. And they gave the excuse that Sigel, his problem is that he couldn't tell which troops they were.
There was a Louisiana group.
So,
And I know he was German, but you know.
They came right out of the creek on like.
I'm going to write an newspaper article about that sometime, or a magazine article. The 1st Louisiana had gray uniforms. Sigel got routed because he claimed he mistook them to the first Iowa, which were clad in gray uniforms.
And they were supposed to, that Sunday morning.
However, if you read what the people in the 1st Iowa wrote, originally they were not all uniformed in gray uniforms. About half of their companies had gray uniforms. Half of them had something else. In addition, if you read what these people wrote, These guys had been in the field for 3 months at that time. Their uniforms were rags. They had replaced them with civilian clothes, most of them. So they were not, and if you read what Siegel wrote 2 after-action reports after the Battle of Wilson's Creek. Never does he mention in either one of those after-action reports getting confused by their uniforms. When he writes this article for, what's the name of that, with Battles and Leaders, what magazine was that published in?
Century.
Century Magazine. When he writes an article for Century Magazine, like 15, 20 years after the war, in 2 places he mentions in there, I walked by the 1st Iowa clothed in their gray uniforms. Twice he mentions that in that article. That's total BS. In my personal opinion, he screwed up.
He didn't have any screens out?
There was no
Cavalry on the right and left flank, but nothing in front.
nothing in front. There was no security out front.
Oh, one skirmisher.
One skirmisher.
Yeah, one skirmisher.
He eventually sent one skirmisher out here and got himself killed.
Yep.
So anyway, that's a convoluted answer, but in my opinion, Siegel's full of bean soup. And
Oh, I agree.
anyway,
He was a good
Osterhouse was
and
but
At some point, the Missouri Guard, I think, they had like these white dusters that they wore.
stop! I'm getting to that.
Sorry.
For you and Jerry, you don't know my thunder. So the State Guard fights very well at Wilson's Creek. They occupy Springfield, and the question is what to do next. Price wants to move north to redeem the state. The first of the Missouri Confederates, where they talk about if we could just get to the Missouri River, we would have an army of 50,000 people. You hear that for the first probably 1,000 times during the war. McCulloch wants no part of it. He says you cannot sustain yourself that far north, so he refuses to help. McCulloch retreats back into Indian Territory, and Price takes off on his own to capture Lexington. When they get to near the town of Osceola, there's a force of Kansans over here under Jim Lane. So you know they're going to go over and try and fight those guys. So they push them out of the way. Price establishes a rear, like supply depot would be the best way to put it, where they're trying to gather ammunition and make ammunition into fixed cartridges and fixed artillery ammunition, while the rest of the army goes north to Lexington. They race the Union, they're racing fast. They hear there's a bunch of money in the banks in Warrensburg, but they arrive too late. The Union escapes. So the Union is concentrated in Lexington, and the State Guard staggers in. The advance elements stagger in on the 11th. The next day, the main body gets there. There's a skirmish. They're not able to take the fort, and so they sit down to a siege while they await ammunition to arrive from Osceola. Eventually, on the night of the 17th, it arrives. So on the beginning of September 18th, they start a siege. This is the fortifications of Lexington. Lexington's a good tour, a good trip. A lot of antebellum homes still, and some of the earthworks still remain. The State Guard surrounds the fortifications. James Mulligan is the commander. He does not protect his rear area. He's got steamboats down here on the river. This is his escape route. He does not protect it. The State Guard surrounds them. And after a 3-day siege, ending on the 20th of September in the Battle of the Hip Bales, where the Union troops, or the State Guard troops, including troops from the 2nd Military District from our area, soak hemp bales in water, push them up the hill, get close to the Union lines. The Union launches a counterattack. They're defeated, and Mulligan realizes that the game's up, and he surrenders. 3,500 soldiers and all kinds of supplies. This is the big victory of the State Guard, all on their own. And once again, there's not much going on in the rest of the war, so Price and the boys are heroes in Richmond at this point, because this is considered a great victory. Question? Your question? Yes.
This is gonna sound like a dumb one, but it's something relative to what you're trying to explain. You've got the Missouri State Guard, which is Confederate, you've got Union troops. And they're both in the same state. And when you go into something like Bold 3 or something, it could name that this man was a member of the Confederate Army. Now, does that mean that he was Missouri State Guard? Because Bold 3 doesn't differentiate like that all the time. It'll just say Confederate, member of the Confederate Army.
If it doesn't differentiate, it probably could.
It means that they're really Missouri State Guard?
It could be.
I mean, I'm talking, these people died in 63 or that, so
Oh,
it's
no,
not like they went east and joined the Confederate Army.
After early 1862, there was no state guard doing much fighting. So if you see it in 1863, it's a regular Confederate army.
Okay, thank you.
Doug, would you say that Union commander would have probably liked to have taken a mulligan? I'll see myself out.
Yeah, he should have. There was, defending Lexington's a bad decision. You know you're going to be well outnumbered. Now, there were some other command issues, but
He died at Cedar Creek.
what's that?
He died at Cedar Creek as a general.
Cedar Creek or Winchester?
In
He died somewhere in Virginia. So Price retreats back to Springfield. He can't maintain himself up here on the Missouri River because John Fremont takes the field and pushes him back down to the southwest part of the state. They stay there until early 1862, when the new commander in the state, in the West, Henry Halleck, launches a campaign to take over, to drive they're tired of the state guard. The state guard has been this nuisance. Nothing can really go on like down the Mississippi River because these guys are just a nuisance being in the field. They got to be driven out. So Halleck appoints Samuel Curtis to drive the state guard out of Missouri. So he starts from Rolla, reaches Springfield, drives the state guard into the arms of their friend Ben McCullough again. And then this guy is appointed supreme commander in the West, and they turn, and they're going to attack at Pea Ridge. However, in the meantime, beginning in December, Price and Jackson realize that the state guard cannot retake the state on their own. They have to have help. So they realize the only way to do this is to join the Confederate Army. So those troops begin mobilizing into the Confederate forces. 2 full brigades are eventually organized. One is commanded by Henry Little, who's not even a Missourian. He's a regular Army officer. He's like the brother-in-law of Alexander Steen. But he's given command of 1 brigade. William Slack, the ill-fated William Slack, gets command of the other brigade. They started to organize a 3rd brigade, but that never really was official.
And these are Missouri State Guard.
These are state guard troops that are now in the Confederate Army.
What's the date?
They started in early December, and they had to stop at the end of December because they're pushed out of the state by the Union Army. But they have 2 full brigades organized at that time, and they're working on a 3rd. So you're probably looking at maybe 6,000 troops that have come over.
There's a good book on the Missouri 1st Brigade.
It's not written by the guy named Bevere, is it?
I don't know. I've got it at home. I'd have to look.
Okay. Because that's a terrible book. In fact, almost any book written by an ex-Confederate, especially Missouri ex-Confederate, is probably not going to be a very good book. At least not very accurate. So the Union pursues into northwest Arkansas. The Confederates, under Van Dorn, turn and attack the Union troops. The Union troops occupy high bluffs on a stream, overlooking a stream. The Telegraph Road that runs all the way from Jefferson Barracks down to Fort Smith, Arkansas, runs right through that position, going past an eatery called Elkhorn Tavern. The Confederates are going to envelop the Union Army, which is really a great plan, and Van Dorn does a really good job, even though the troops are like starving to death. But it takes them forever to get around. So Price and the Missourians are on one side. They make it to the rear of the Union Army. Van Dorn orders McCullough to take his guys around, and they are going to take Ford Road. All these guys are going to link up in the rear of the Union Army. Unfortunately for the Confederates, McCullough is killed during reconnaissance. McIntosh, his second in command, leads a charge, and he is killed. The third in charge, Hebert, is captured in thick woods and smog. Fourth guy in charge, Elkanah Greer, is off doing scouting, so nobody's in charge. So these guys sit there, and half of the Confederate Army does nothing for the rest of the day. So that leaves the Missourians here to try to win the day. So they are in the rear now of the Union Army, but they have to get out of this low ground here and get on the Pea Ridge Plateau so they can fight on even terrain. They slug it out here with the Union all day. They're not making a whole lot of progress. Van Dorn is not really pushing it because he expects the other wing to come over and help. Once he finds out that those guys are dead and his troops are not participating in the fight, finally he orders these guys to attack. They attack up this, seriously attack. They attack up this high ground, really steep. If you've ever been to Pea Ridge near Alcorn Tavern, it is really steep and rough and rugged. And eventually they make it onto the high ground. They do that because the State Guard, the State Guard troops that have not gone into the Confederate Army, they're really the heroes here. They swing around way to the left, their left. They get behind the Union Army and force them to retreat. Unfortunately for the Confederates, darkness puts an end to the fighting, and the two sides are just waiting to slug it out the next day. Unfortunately for the Confederates, Van Dorn is not a logistical genius. He had started the campaign with 1 day of extra rations and a little load of extra ammunition. Regrettably for them, he leaves it. The Confederates advanced on the Bentonville detour, probably way back here.
Yeah.
He leaves the ammunition train there under a guy named Martin Green, who's from just north of here a little bit, Lewis County, eventually commands the Missouri Brigade. Leaves it back there for protection. And so they're short on food and ammunition anyway, and when the next morning rolls around and these Confederate commanders begin asking for a resupply of ammunition, Van Dorn realizes that his supply train is 8 miles to the rear. It would take hours over those rough roads to get here. So the gig is up. He has no choice but to retreat from the battlefield. The Confederates probably would have lost anyway. The Union had a superiority in artillery and probably in manpower at that point because there were so many Confederate casualties. But anyway, Van Dorn has to retreat from the battlefield, and the battle is over. And when those Missouri Guardsmen march off this field, they are not going to come back. Most of them will never come back. Reach the state again.
And they're ticked off at Van Dorn. They write songs about how much they despise Earl Van Dorn.
Yep.
And the other part, I don't know, what is your opinion, Doug? Do you think they could have pushed a wagon down that Bentonville detour? Like,
In time to be resupplied?
even fit one on the trail?
Oh, yeah, they could have gotten it down there. Yeah, it was wide enough to get a wagon down there. But it would have got there in time. It would have taken, first you got to send a runner there, 8 miles. So that takes an hour probably if you're on a horse. But then you got to get those guys up and moving, and who knows if even the horses are hit? I mean, you don't even know. How long would it have taken? It got taken hours to get there, and they were already under a Union attack and running out of the ammunition they had. So it's doubtful they could have gotten there in time.
It's really interesting when you look at it because anybody with half a brain would have done their logistics stuff the evening prior.
Why weren't those guys screaming for ammunition? Why weren't they organized?
Why do you think Van Dorn was sent to the west? Because he screwed up in the east.
The Union Army that night reorganized their forces. They repositioned them, they resupplied, they fed them. And Curtis had a staff, he had at least 8 by name that I know of. And he probably had more lower enlisted runners and stuff like that. But he had a good sized staff. Van Dorn brought his chief of staff with him, and that was it. So he fell in on an army with no staff. So all that stuff, and the State Guard, for all their good points, the State Guard is never good at logistics. So it just slipped through their fingers.
They sucked.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe that no company commander or regimental commander or brigade commander, nobody fought to call for ammunition. Part of it was they're so exhausted. They had been pushed beyond what was physically possible and still did it, to their credit. So a lot of those officers were probably just done. This is a picture, famous picture. Elkhorn Tavern. This is the State Guard in their white uniforms that they stole. They were these were undyed wool uniforms trimmed in blue. They were supposed to go to Albert Pike's Indian Brigade, but the State Guard, as was their habit, stole them before they reached there. So they fought in those when they went east, they fought in those for a long time before they finally got Confederate uniforms. So this is at dusk. See, they got the State Guard flag, and they are attacking the 1st Iowa Battery that they're going to overrun just north of Elkhorn Tavern. So that is the last major battle that the State Guard participates in as a unit. Talk a little bit about what happens to them later, but for the most part, once they retreat on the Pea Ridge from the Pea Ridge battlefield, they will not fight any more major battles west of the river, and most of them will not return ever.
Where's Franz Siegel at here?
Franz Siegel's over here.
Okay.
He's actually doing a real good
Yeah, he
job
did a great job with his artillery.
directing the artillery. They just annihilated this side of the Confederate Army, which were mostly Missourians over here. McCullough's brigade joins. Mark makes that huge march around Big Mountain to get with the rest of the army, but they're just completely bored out. They arrive in the wee hours of the morning, so it's mostly Missourians that are in this line right here. And yeah, they just blast this part of the line to pieces. So here's the retreat route on the Huntsville Road. Goes down. They end up in a place called War Eagle Mill. It's called War Eagle Mill. It's still there today. That one was burned, but this was rebuilt. You can go and buy stone ground corn to make corn pone and stuff like that. It's a neat little place. So anyway, they retreat east and then south, and then they never come back. So we talked about what happens to the guys that were with Price. But once again, that's not the only State Guardsmen. There's a division of State Guardsmen in the southeast part of the state under Meriwether Jeff Thompson. And they fight in the southeast part of the state and in the Boot Hill area, northeast Arkansas. Thompson, for a while, commands a riverboat, a gunboat. And I need to look this up, but I think there's probably State Guardsmen who became river soldiers for a while. And then the Union overruns Memphis after Fort Henry and Donelson fall, and then Memphis falls, so their boat has gone away, and Thompson has to come back. But that's something I'd like to look at. But Thompson spends the whole war. He's not really a guerrilla per se, because his troops are organized, but they're fighting in the swamps. They do hit and run tactics. They'll do raids. Their biggest raid was they went all the way north into Jefferson County, and they attacked the Big River Bridge over the big bridge over the Big River.
Wow.
Bridge over the Big River. I'll finally get that out. On the St. Louis and Iron Mountain Railroad, they destroy a great iron bridge, and that that obviously gets the attention of the Union Army. So after attacking that bridge, they retreat down to Fredericktown. That gets the attention of the commander in southeast Missouri. And Cape Girardeau is who?
U.S. Grant.
U.S. Grant. So Grant sends two forces, 1,500 men from Ironton under Colonel Carlin, and 3,500 men under Plummer that are in Cape Girardeau, and they're going to go and they're going to try and defeat this force. Thompson, when he knows Union troops are coming, he decides he's going to retreat because his force is probably half the size of the Union force attacking him. So he retreats about 12 miles from town, and then he thinks about it a while, and he decides, yeah, I'm going to go fight them after all. So he turns and goes back toward Fredericktown, and a couple miles south of town, he sets up an ambush. He doesn't realize the Union force is quite so large, but he wants to ambush the force that comes south out of town. So this is the first map we'll look at, and when I taught officer candidate school, I told my officer candidates, there's one thing you can be sure of, the top of the map is always north. Well, not in this case. Somebody did this, and there's no reason for it. It's the same shape, whether you do north, I don't understand. Anyway, so if you're looking from the courthouse square, the Union troops arrive in Fredericktown. Colonel Carlin says he's sick. He doesn't really want to do anything. And then the troops, Colonel Plummer's troops from Cape Girardeau come over. He organizes them, and they're going to go out and they're going to fight the Confederates who have an ambush set up. Well, it doesn't quite work out because there's a lot more Federals than they thought. So the Federals deploy on each side. This is the road to Greenville, Old Greenville. Anybody ever been to Old Greenville? Oh, it's cool, isn't it? It's really neat. So the Federals deploy, and this is a graveyard here. And this was a cornfield at the time. And the two sides kind of get together. They bang away at each other for a long time. The Federals will have finally deployed troops on the right, and the Confederates will have to retreat down the Greenville Road, but Thompson has prepared a smaller ambush because he assumes that Union cavalry will pursue, and correctly, that's right, Plummer does pursue, and they run into this ambush here. There's a firefight there. The Union is driven off. They don't pursue anymore, and the Confederates retreat back into the swamps. And that's the biggest action, although these guys participate in a lot of battles, small skirmishes. That particular division, that's kind of an orphan division, that's really their big fight in the war. And you can go, since it's right on, you go just south of Fredericktown, and the cemetery's there, and there's markers there that will, in fact, that's where these pictures come from, markers. You can still go and see where the battle was.
Jeff Thompson maybe didn't have a big impact, but he did psychologically impact Grant's decisions at Belmont. One of the reasons Grant's like, we got to get out of here, because there was a big rumor, Jeff Thompson's coming. Well, Jeff Thompson was nowhere near Belmont, but psychologically, he was in everybody's head for some reason.
And probably had only a couple thousand troops.
Yeah.
But the psychological effect was much greater. So the Confederates, or the State Guard begins transitioning into Confederate troops in December. By the end of the month, they have to stop because they're driven out of Springfield. After the Battle of Pea Ridge, Van Dorn goes on this odyssey where he marches way over to the eastern part of Arkansas, and eventually he takes his army, including, he actually takes everybody over there. The state guardsmen who will not transition into the Confederate Army eventually come back, And they stay in Arkansas under Generals McBride and Raines throughout the war, and they participate in some battles. I believe they were at Prairie Grove, but for the most part, they don't really do a whole lot, and there's not a whole lot of them left. The Confederates don't really like them; they don't want to mess with them, but they're just kind of there. These guys, you can see the list here. When these guys cross the Mississippi River, there's 2 brigades when they cross the Mississippi River. There's probably about 8,000 of them altogether. They fought at Corinth, Iuka, Hatchie Bridge, Grand Gulf, Port Gibson, Champion Hill, Big Black River, Vicksburg, New Hope Church, Kennesaw Mountain, Atlanta, Altoona, Franklin, and Fort Blakely. None of these guys made it home. Henry Little's brigade commander, John Bowen from St. Louis, died of dysentery in Vicksburg. Martin Green commanded the Missouri Brigade at Vicksburg and was killed there. William Slack died at Pea Ridge. Colonel Hughes was an active brigadier general, died at Lexington. Alexander Steen died at Prairie Grove. And I forgot who this was. I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, so many Confederate generals died. Missourians died. Killed in action, died of disease. So after the Battle of Franklin was really kind of the last death knell to the. They started out with 2 brigades. Eventually, their numbers were reduced so much that it became 1 brigade. And then after the utter complete disaster at Franklin, there's 240 men left out of those 2 brigades. Wow. They were simply slaughtered.
Did a lot of them get captured at Vicksburg too and get paroled and just
Yes.
melt away?
Some of them melted away. Yeah, that was a problem. They were captured in Vicksburg, and then they were paroled until they were exchanged for a Union prisoner. But the problem was they had no place to go. The other troops from parts of the South that were not occupied, they could go home. So the Missourians had no place to go. So some of them did disappear. Most of them eventually came back, but some just melted away. Some were picked up by Shelby in the summer of 1864 to go on the Missouri expedition to pilot out. Deserters.
Yeah, and they knew if they got captured again, they'd probably be executed
Yeah.
because they violated their parole.
So my conclusions, the state legislature waited too long to enact the military bill. They should, if they really wanted to take the state out of the Union, they should have done it in January when they had the chance, when secession fever was gripping the state. They also waited too long to mobilize, in the same vein, they waited too long to mobilize those troops. All of the Missouri troops probably could have been used better east of the Mississippi. The Western Theater the Trans-Mississippi was lost to them. Certainly after Pea Ridge, it was lost. And they squandered all kinds of resources attempting to take it back. Probably an argument from some folks about that, but that's kind of my opinion. The Confederate authorities lied to the Missourians. They told them when they came east, they would only be here for a short while. And that turned out not to be true. They never, other than individual soldiers, they were never, like Marmaduke and Price, Shelby, they were never allowed to go home. The Confederates wasted those troops that they were sent. They served under Price, Van Dorn, Bragg, Pemberton, and John Hood. They served under some of the worst commanders in the Confederate Army. And they were just slaughtered. The Missouri Brigade was really the shock brigade of Pemberton's army. They were, if not the best, they were among the very, very best troops in that Western Army. So the troops that joined the State Guard early in the war were really the most fervent towards secession, and kind of the best blood in the state, if you will. And they proved it when they went east of the Mississippi and became, among the best troops in that army. So it's an amazing organization. The fact that they were able to stay in the field for so long with almost no support is really amazing. One thing I forgot to say, in Lexington, talked about money and branch banks. The Federals had taken all the money from the State Bank of Lexington, and it was buried under General Mulligan's tent. So when when the State Guard took over Lexington, they got the money back, and Price returned. This was about $1 million. Price returned all of it like what he was authorized by the legislature to support the Guard. He returned the rest of that money to the State Bank of Lexington. He would probably been better off keeping it because they certainly needed it. All right, we've got a little long. Any questions?
Just a comment, how dare you say that such stellar generals like Braxton Bragg and John Belda were incompetent? We named an Army force after them, and then we tried to unname them. So you must be woke or something, because they're wonderful. And old Pat Price, how dare you cast aspersions? I mean, he's revered, by our southern-leaning friends. So I don't know if I like this.
Well, we talk about Hood. Lee made the remark that he didn't think Hood would make a very good Army commander.
Yeah.
He was surprised that they made him Army commander. He was a good divisional commander or corps commander, but not an Army commander.
Yeah, a lot of guys died in a pretty short time under his command.
Especially at Nashville, or not Nashville, not Nashville.
Well, Nashville too, but Franklin was the worst.
Franklin, where he sent him in without any artillery.
Yeah.
Lost 11 generals?
6 generals.
6.
How many brigades were under Pemberton at Vicksburg?
Total brigades?
Well, probably.
There was just one Missouri brigade. By that time, there was just one Missouri brigade.
Under Green.
They had been reduced to about half their numbers since they crossed the Mississippi a year before. So there was probably 2,500 of them left at that point, maybe. As far as total brigades, I don't know. He had maybe 35,000 men?
Pemberton, yeah.
Yeah. So divide by 2,000, so maybe 60 brigades, something like that. Approximately. Other questions?
And was Marmaduke, his uncle was Lyons?
His uncle was Claiborne Jackson, the brother.
Oh, Jack, by marriage or blood?
By blood.
Blood.
Yeah. Yeah, Jackson had married into the Sappington family. And Marmaduke's mother was a Sappington.
Marmaduke's mother was a what?
A Sappington.
And Marmaduke had a duel with one of the other generals on the South over he didn't support him at what was the city on Mississippi that
Helena?
yeah.
Helena. Yeah. Yeah, there were several duels during the war, and as far as I know, nobody was ever really punished for any of them.
Yeah, Marmaduke called was in Walker coward, and months later and then Walker died of.
Was that in Little Rock?
Yeah.
That happened? Yes, sir.
Didn't the Confederates raid a bunch of hamlets in that area to get food because they didn't have any food?
Oh yeah, not just state guards, but I mean all soldiers would pretty much steal from the civilians in most areas. Yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah, they stripped. Any place they were, they'd strip it.
Okay, I thought so.
Called foraging.
Yeah, foraging. And sometimes it was encouraged, and sometimes it was discouraged. But it probably didn't make much difference.
You wonder how many people died. Just they're so civilians.
Some did. It was hard. It would have been hard if you lost all your food supply.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doug.
Well, you're welcome.